Yeah, I was born and raised in New York City. Actually, my adolescent years was in the Bronx, New York. And during my early years at home, my mother, who's from the Caribbean, loved Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Mongo Santa Maria, all the jazz stuff. That's all I heard. And coupled with the Motown stuff that I grew up with was all that was playing in the home a lot. You know, a lot of Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter. My mother was pretty hip. And I would hear this when we were cleaning up the house and everything, and I hadn't even picked up the instrument. Truth be told, I was actually a dancer at age 6. My brothers and I had a James Brown review. We went around town and talent shows and won first prize. I did this James Brown thing, like Michael Jackson did in some of his footage. And we couldn't afford a video camera back then, but it would have been nice to have seen what that footage was like. However, I first got turned on to musical instrument by the time I was 8 years old. My aunt bought my uncle a guitar, and she wanted to show it to me. She said, "Look what I bought your uncle." And she opened it up in the box. It was like, wow, what's that? You know, I was tripping. And but I had a special connection with it. And later on in my early years of playing, I found out why. My uncle began playing guitar way earlier than I began playing the bass. But I told him, I said, my Uncle Ralph Bunch, I said, I want to learn how to play the guitar. And I was about 14. And so he says, sure, we could do that. So I played the guitar and I couldn't bar the chords. My hands were real small. I said, Uncle Ralph, is there something else I could play? He said, well, you could try the bass. And I said, okay, let's try that. So my mom gave him $60. We went to Bronin's Music in the Bronx up on Fordham Road. And we looked on the wall and they had basses, and I picked out a Sunburst bass. It was a small scale bass. And I picked it out, and it was made in Russia or something. But it had almost the same spelling as my name, Sekou. It said Sekov. So I kind of cut the tip off of the thing so it could say my name. So I said, I'm pretty much destined to play this instrument. And so for about a year, every Friday I went to my uncle's house and he showed me how to tune the bass. He showed me scales. And by the end of that year, I was off and running and playing in the neighborhood. I was approaching junior high school. I was in junior high school and met other musicians, local musicians, and probably did my first local gig in my first year at a bar. I couldn't have been no more than 15. I was like, they let kids in these places. And I was playing Fender jazz bass. It was taller than I was at the time. And that was the beginning of my playing career, playing around the Bronx, and then playing in clubs and in school, wherever I could find, and wherever I saw a musician that had a guitar case, I always inquired, you know, what is that? You play? Are you jamming? Where at? You know, and I was there. So that was the beginning of my playing career on the bass. I'll tell you a funny story. You want to hear one? I answered an ad for a gig in the Poconos, and the guy said it was paying $400 a week. So at 18 years old, that's a lot of money in 1978. So I said, wow, I could play that, because I could hear anything and play it. I mean, my ear was just very sharp. So I said, I'll just go out there and hear what he's doing. And then, so I get to the rehearsal studio, and he opens up the book, and there's nothing but these black dots, which I later learned they were all 16 notes. And it was like a rock and roll kind of feel thing, and or a bunch of eighth notes, and he counted it off. And I stood there like this and said, he said, let me count it again. So he counts it again, and I go, when do you want me to start? So he says, oh no, I'm sorry, I need somebody that can read. And I was so embarrassed and floored. I packed up my bass case, you know, those were the hard cases. I didn't even have a gig bag then. And I got into the elevator. This was M&R Studios on 30th Street. And I got in that elevator and sunk down to the floor and just said, I was thinking about that $400. But more importantly, I couldn't read the bass parts. So every day from that day, I went to 48th Street and read every book on electric bass reading that I could find. I felt I was talented enough, and I was working some gigs, but I didn't even think about going to Juilliard or Berkeley or anything like that. My focus was learn all the stuff I could learn by ear and everything, but reading became a very important thing for me. So every day I read. I kept reading. I asked other musicians who went to school, what does this mean? Play that phrase, And this is how I learned to read music, and it landed me a lot of gigs from being that diligent. And then I actually played on Broadway in the Dreamgirls, the original play. I was a sub for Tinker Barfield. And then I later became the regular bass player because he was on tour with Luther a lot. And that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun playing and reading with pro college graduates. These people were brilliant musicians in the pit, and I was the youngest one. I was like only 21 years old. And a lot of these people were a lot older than me, so that was a great experience. So it perfected my craft, in reading, and it made you sharp, And I had the distinct pleasure of rewriting the book and putting in all the stuff that wasn't in the original that they wanted, So that was a great experience at that time. And from there, I went on to, I did get married and had two daughters that I was raising in Cleveland, Ohio. And I started my own career as a soul artist there. And my manager at the time signed me to Sugar Hill Records. I was also on the Sugar Hill record label, and I did 2 singles for them. Can't Stop Loving You and Pretty Baby. You can see those on YouTube. And Joe Robinson liked my stuff, Sylvia Robinson, and they signed me. And I was probably the only artist, maybe myself and one other, who wasn't a rapper. Sugar Hill was known for the Rapper's Delight hit. And so I did 2 singles for them, and that began my solo career. After about maybe 3 years after that, and my marriage and my wife and I, we parted. And I said, it's time to move on and get back into some playing, because I took a break for a while. And I didn't want to go back to New York because I felt that I exhausted everything in New York. I've been in all the clubs, toured from around New York. I said, I want to try to get to LA. And so I met up with George Howard, and George was on tour a lot. He was big name, and I toured with him for a while, and I decided to move to California. And this is when I started playing with the whole West Coast crew. Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson and all of them, and George Benson, everybody that was out here recording Lionel Richie. I was able to join that clique and get in with them, and that's where I met Angela Winbush and Ronald Isley. I'd worked with the Isley Brothers for now 20 years or so, and I co-produced them when they were on Warner. So that was a delight because I grew up on that music, and to be able to say I produced them was really big, It was a wonderful experience. And so I got to do a lot of sessions, a lot of dates out here, and a lot of television, and a lot of touring, with a lot of people like Anita Baker, Luther Vandross, Roger Daltrey from The Who, Mark Anthony, a ton of jazz acts, Wayne Shorter, Stanley Clarke. These were a lot of my favorite musicians and recording artists, and I got to play with them a lot, and it required knowing a lot of the different styles of music, and how to get that sound and how to, play it well. So it did me pretty good.